The stars were dimmer now, as though some unseen hand had drawn a veil of ash across the firmament. Once, these heavens blazed with the radiant fire of 1,000 thriving worlds, but now they flickered like dying embers, pallid and cold. Ruined ship cities drifted in slow rotation across the void, monuments to a greatness long surrendered to silence. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for a dawn that would never rise, haunted by the memory of the Constellum Eternal, the empire that had once believed itself infinite, and above the shattered remains of its capital sector, where planets lay hollowed and moons hung cracked like broken marrow, a single figure stood alone, as though carved from sorrow itself. We speak to you now, and we say this gently. In this vast and haunted tapestry of stars, we truly love and care for you. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Elendor Vale, High Sovereign of the Ashen Constellum, had lived long enough to see the brilliance of his creation wither into dust. He stood upon a balcony crafted from the hull plating of what was once a royal dreadnought, now serving as a platform overlooking a lifeless world. His cloak, once woven with iridescent fibers drawn from stellar silk farms, hung faded and frayed. The winds that blew across the barren surface carried neither warmth nor the scent of life, only the cold whisper of regret echoing across ancient stone. This world, Arcanthus Prime, had once been the cradle of his grand empire. Now only memories lingered, fractured and fragile. He had not always been eternal. Once, Elendor had been a man of flesh and time, like all others. The path to immortality had not been sought for selfish desire, but for preservation. The Constellum was vast, spanning nebulae and cosmic rivers of ionized stars. Leadership, it was believed, required continuity. He was to be the unbroken thread, the eternal mind that would guide civilizations through eras of prosperity. And for centuries, no, millennia, he had done so. Worlds flourished beneath his governance, cultures interlaced peacefully, science and art reached transcendent heights. His people believed him wise, steadfast, compassionate. But even constellations burn out. Elendor closed his eyes as the void wind stirred faint motes of dust from the ruined courtyard below. In the silence, he heard again the whispers of the moment everything changed. The day ambition ceased to be a blessing and became devouring hunger. The hive, the word itself carried the lingering taste of dread like metal blood on the tongue. It had begun as a dream of unity, a network of shared consciousness meant to elevate the species beyond fragmentation, a safeguard against stagnation, against decay. The architect had promised transcendence. Seraphine had warned of danger. Seraphine. Even thinking her name felt like reopening an old wound that had never scarred. She had once stood beside him, a companion in thought and spirit, a voice of gentleness and reason in the court of celestial power. Her hands were steady, her eyes unwavering, her love quiet but profound. She had seen the path ahead long before Elendor had acknowledged its course. She had understood the fragility hidden beneath the Empire's apparent perfection, and she had known that the desire for eternal continuation could twist into something monstrous. He had not listened. He could not listen. Not then. The hive had not appeared overnight. Its presence had been subtle at first, the way illness hides beneath a heartbeat. The first specimens had shown extraordinary qualities: adaptability beyond genetic expectation, resilience against decay. They learned, they evolved, they consumed to improve. And Elendor, spiraling deeper into certainty that this was the path to survival, sanctioned further integration. The architect refined, expanded, accelerated. Science had blurred into devotion, devotion into obsession. When the first planet fell silent, the Empire assumed a natural calamity. But Elendor knew. Something in the quietness after that tragedy felt designed. Not a failure, but the first step into something larger, more complex, more hungry. Now he looked upon the horizon, where skeletal towers of once living architecture reached, toward a sky that no longer held light. The Hive had taken so much, worlds, fleets, entire nebulae, but its most devastating victory had been intangible. It had devoured hope. It had devoured identity. And now, in this new stillness, where echoes of the past clung like dust to memory, Elendor felt the weight of his decisions pressing like the gravity of a collapsed star. He had fled not to survive, but to remember. For memory was the only battlefield left where the past could be confronted. The Constellum was not merely gone. It had been consumed, rewritten into a new existence, a singular hunger that pulsed through the void. And Elendor, bound to immortality, could not escape the burden of witnessing the consequences of his own making. But a whisper of purpose had begun to surface through the despair. Rumors had reached him. Small fragments of intercepted transmissions, encoded signals, faint psionic remnants drifting through the warp currents. Survivors, not many, not powerful, but alive. Pockets of resistance clinging to the fading light of what had once been. He did not know whether they would hate him, reject him, or destroy him on sight. It did not matter. They were the last thread of a tapestry fraying at every edge. If there was to be redemption, not for him perhaps, but for the galaxy itself, he would need to find them. He turned from the balcony. The corridors of the derelict city ship stretched endlessly, illuminated only by flickering amber lights that pulsed like dying heartbeats. He walked slowly, though his steps were steady, each footfall echoing softly through the hollow halls. Time had ceased to hold meaning for him long ago. Every moment felt stretched and suspended, like the final note of a sorrowful song. Yet something had shifted in him. This journey he now prepared to undertake was not born of hope, nor of pride, nor even of repentance. It was something deeper, an acknowledgement of responsibility entwined with the faintest ember of resolve. He could not undo what had been done, but perhaps he could prevent the Hive from completing what it had begun, devouring the last fragments of individuality, of memory, of soul. Elendor paused at a sealed hangar door. The glyphs carved into its surface had once symbolized unity and continuity. Now they looked like gravestones. With a gesture, the door parted. Inside rested a single vessel, a sleek, narrow craft designed for silent traversal through forgotten star routes. It had been built long before the Hive, during the era when exploration was still driven by curiosity rather than fear. He ran his hand along its hull. He whispered, not to the ship, but to the stars beyond it, "I am coming." Not as a sovereign, not as a savior, but as the last shadow of a dream that had nearly consumed creation itself. The engines warmed, humming like the memory of a once living heart. As the ship lifted into the lightless sky, Elendor did not look back. The past no longer needed witnesses. The future would judge him soon enough. And with that, he left the dead world behind, carrying only a name, a sorrow, and the faintest glimmer of purpose into the endless dark. The vessel moved through the void like a shard of memory gliding across a sea of forgotten light. Elendor sat in its command cradle, his gaze fixed upon the starfield ahead. The view was silent, but silence now was a language he understood. For a long time, there had been only the stillness of ruin, only the echo of what once was. Yet now, as the ship followed a course etched into his mind centuries before, another kind of silence emerged, a remembrance unbidden, rising like starlight over an ancient horizon. For the first time in ages, his thoughts drifted backward. There was a time when the Constellum Eternal was not a graveyard of lost worlds, but a realm of radiance. Its worlds gleamed beneath living suns, vast reactors of caged stellar flame, engineered to burn eternally and nourish civilizations across the void. Elendor had walked there not as a sorrowed wanderer, but as a sovereign adored. The halls of Arcanthos Prime had thrummed with life, filled with scholars, explorers, artists whose works defied language. Children would look to him as though he were carved from constellations themselves. He had not yet known the weight of time. He had not yet understood the loneliness of immortality. He remembered the council chamber, walls of crystalline alloy catching the sun's rays, scattering colours like prismatic waterfalls. A place where ideals had converged, where voices rose not in anger, but curiosity. And among those voices, one had always rung clearest: Seraphine Vale. She had moved through the court like a quiet star, luminous without seeking to shine. Her brilliance was not loud nor forceful, but patient, thoughtful, grounded. Her knowledge spanned the sciences of life and consciousness, not as one who wished to dominate nature, but one who sought to understand its quiet harmonies. She had believed that everything living was in conversation with everything else, that existence was not a hierarchy, but a tapestry. Elendor had found comfort in her presence, the way her mind mirrored his own while remaining distinct, a world he could endlessly rediscover. He saw her now as she had been then, standing beside him on the observation tier overlooking the orbital gardens of Helion 4, the birthplace of the Constellum's enlightenment. Endless flower fields suspended in gravity-tempered domes, each petal folded with mathematically elegant precision. The two had spoken of the Empire's future, of how to guide a civilization that had outgrown fear, hunger, and war. But even in that age of abundance, a shadow had hovered at the edge of Elendor's perception. It was subtle, like a note slightly out of tune in a chorus of harmonious sound. Time. Time was the enemy that no fleet could conquer, no council could negotiate with, no scientist could persuade. Time devoured empires, eroded unity, fractured memory. And though the Constellum thrived, Elendor saw how slowly, imperceptibly, worlds drifted toward divergence, ideals dimmed, knowledge scattered, generations reshaped the meanings of everything he had once held sacred. He feared that everything would one day fade, just as the stars themselves slowly burned away. Seraphine had warned him that fear, once accepted, could distort even the purest vision. It was in those days that another figure rose to prominence, the architect, a mind of brilliance more intense, more erratic, more consuming than any other in the Empire. He had emerged from the laboratories of the Exosynaptic Guild, a small research sect dedicated to the study of cognitive evolution. Where Seraphine saw life as a conversation, the architect saw life as a ladder, ascending toward perfection through adaptation, consumption, and integration. His words had been persuasive. Immortality is not stagnation, my sovereign. Immortality is motion without end. It is the ability to evolve beyond death, to transcend limitation. We cannot remain what we are and endure eternity. To live forever is to grow forever. To grow forever is to consume. Elendor, who had witnessed the fragility of civilizations over millennia had listened. Seraphine, who had witnessed the fragility of the individual soul, had opposed him. The council chamber that had once echoed with collaborative thought slowly transformed into a battleground of ideology, not through shouting or fury, but through something colder, doubt. Elendor began to question whether preservation alone was enough, whether the Constellum could maintain coherence across the endless centuries ahead, whether unity required more than shared memory. Perhaps it required shared being. Seraphine had tried to speak to him once, in private, beneath the artificial auroras of the crystal atrium. He remembered her voice, soft yet resolute. Elendor, to merge all thought into one is not unity. It is erasure. You speak of immortality, but life is not defined by duration. It is defined by change. To fear the end is to fear being alive. He had taken her hands then, not as a sovereign, nor as a philosopher, but as a man who had once known what it meant to love without consequence. I do not fear the end, he had told her. I fear that everything we built will be forgotten. Her expression had softened, sorrow passing through her like a shadow across starlight. Then let things be remembered, she said. Not preserved, remembered. But memory, Elendor thought then, could be lost. Memory could fade. Memory could die. And so he had made his choice. The Constellum entered the era of biotranscendence. Laboratories expanded, research accelerated. The architect's theories flourished, approved under Elendor's seal. Seraphine stepped back, not defeated, but grieving. She remained by his side, but there was distance now, thin, invisible, growing. And somewhere deep within that distance, the first thread of the future hive was spun. The ship hummed softly as Elendor's thoughts returned slowly to the present. Stars slid past like pale ghosts. He exhaled, though he no longer needed breath. Immortality had stripped such necessities from him, yet habits remained, the echoes of humanity refusing to yield completely. Ahead, a faint signal pulsed in the void, coordinates encoded in a tone so subtle only a mind shaped by centuries of star navigation could interpret it. Survivors. The first step of his journey. He moved his hand to adjust the course, yet his mind remained suspended in the memory of those radiant days. Days when the Constellum had still believed it had solved the universe. Days before hunger took the shape of salvation. Seraphine had seen all of it before he had, and he, blinded by a desire to preserve, had set in motion the force that now devoured. The stars before him darkened slightly as the vessel entered a nebula of drifting particulate matter, cosmic dust illuminated by the faint glow of dying stars. It reminded him of the gardens of Helion 4, though now the resemblance was more elegy than echo. The Constellum had not fallen in an instant. It had dimmed slowly, like a candle starved of oxygen. And now, Elendor sought those who still clung to its last embers. He did not seek forgiveness. He sought a way to end the hunger he had unleashed. The journey forward would not be swift, nor certain, nor merciful. But at last, he had begun to move again. The signal pulsed again, soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing across the void. Elendor's vessel adjusted its trajectory with a gentle burn of thruster fire, curving through the nebula's drifting haze. The stardust outside glimmered faintly, suspended like ancient pollen scattered on a forgotten breeze. The nebula was known once as the Vale of Orash, where migrant worlds had once gathered to celebrate the bloom of stellar roses, cosmic flora that formed from radiant plasma filaments. Now, those roses were gone, burned away or consumed. Only the veil remained, dim and silent, The signal was not just a call, it was a memory encoded in frequency and tone. Only someone who had lived the rise of the Constellum would recognize it. Elendor had sent that pattern himself, long ago, to summon allies to private councils. It was a message for those who remembered what the Empire had once been. And now it called back to him, like a ghost tapping gently on a door that had been closed for centuries. He let the ship drift on automatic guidance, while his mind slipped once more into recollection, drawn now toward the figure who had reshaped the destiny of everything, the architect. The architect had not been born into nobility or power. He emerged from the lower strata of Helion 4, raised in the shadow of the vast genetic distilleries that supported the Constellum's agricultural biospheres. From an early age, he had seen the Empire's beauty from the bottom up, how fragile it truly was. He saw worlds dependent on systems that could fail, ecosystems built on balances that could shift, and people who, though living long and comfortable lives, could still fall prey to time. For him, the Empire's splendor was a delicate lattice. Elegant, yes, but brittle. His genius was undeniable. He advanced through academies with ease, not because he sought recognition, but because his mind demanded understanding. Elendor had first met him during a symposium on metasynthetic symbiosis, where scholars debated how consciousness could interact with collective neural structures. Others argued theory and ethics. The architect simply demonstrated. A living organism, small, harmless, had been presented to the audience. It had no central nervous system, no capacity for complex response. Yet, with what appeared to be a whisper of thought, the architect caused it to shift its shape, adapt to stimuli, move with intention. The hall had gone silent in awe. No one understood how he had achieved it. Not even Elendor, whose knowledge spanned epochs. Afterward, they spoke for hours about the nature of identity, evolution, continuity. The architect spoke of life as a fractal, patterns repeating across scale and time, always reaching for greater complexity. Elendor had been struck by how calmly he spoke of concepts that others treated as abstractions. For the architect, they were simply truths waiting to be enacted. It was Seraphine who first grew wary of him. She recognized something in his gaze, a hunger not for power, but for inevitability. Where she saw life as something to nurture, he saw it as something to refine. Where she saw growth as gentle adaptation, he saw it as conquest of limitation. She once told Elendor, in quiet words that trembled with unspoken fear, that the architect was a man who believed the universe itself required correction. But Elendor had not listened, because the architect promised something no one else dared, a solution to time. The first phase of research had been carefully structured, as all things were in the Golden Age. Controlled genetic scaffolds, psychodynamic resonance matrices, neural threaded consciousness bridges. Seraphine had observed, consulted, and debated. The architect had refined, adjusted, reimagined, and Elendor had watched, fascinated, hopeful. The prototype was born in the luminary vaults, deep beneath the crystalline gardens of Helion 4. A symbiotic organism, not alive in the way a creature is alive, nor artificial in the way machines are. It existed somewhere between thought and sinew, between instinct and logic. It responded to stimuli not through reaction, but through intention. It adapted instantly. It remembered. It learned. Seraphine had stood beside Elendor during the first demonstration. The organism, no larger than a seed, was introduced to a shifting environment. Heat, cold, radiation, chemical imbalance, each condition transformed it. It reshaped itself into forms that were more efficient, more suited, more evolved. Elendor had whispered, with awe rather than fear, "It is beautiful." Seraphine had replied, quietly and without accusation, "Beauty without restraint is still a blade." The architect had simply smiled. It was not until later that the organism was given access to neural simulation frameworks. That was the turning point, when consciousness, not awareness, but shared cognition, entered the equation. The organism did not merge with other minds. It integrated them, learned from them, became stronger through them. Everything it consumed added to what it was. Every failure became evolution. Elendor remembered standing in the observation chamber when it first demonstrated preference, not instinct, but choice. It reached not for the easier source of energy, but the stronger one, the more complex, the more alive. It chose life over simplicity. He should have seen then what Seraphine already feared, that the organism would not remain limited to controlled conditions, that it would grow, reach, seek. Yet Elendor had been blinded by possibility. He still believed that evolution could be guided, contained, directed. The architect had assured him of it. "The hive does not consume to destroy," he had said, while data panels flickered with streams of genetic adaptation. "It consumes to perfect. The constellum will not fracture across time. It will converge. It will remain." Elendor, who had once feared nothing more than the slow erosion of unity, had embraced this hope. The vessel emerged finally from the nebula, gliding into the open void. Before him floated the source of the signal, a station, a memory of the Empire's early star lanes. It was small, circular, constructed of pearlescent alloy that still shimmered faintly with residual power. A listening post, forgotten by most, but not by all. A faint glow lit its docking corridor. Someone, or something, was still there. Elendor remained still for a long moment, the weight of what he remembered pressing against what awaited him. The architect's brilliance, Seraphine's warning, the first seed of the hive. Everything traced back to these choices, these crossroads, these quiet rooms where futures were shaped not by armies, but conversations. He guided the vessel into the docking ring, the clamps locking with a soft, metallic sigh. The lights inside flickered to life as he stepped through the airlock, the station breathing again for the first time in centuries. The corridor ahead was silent, empty, but not abandoned. He could feel it, faint, fragile, but real. Someone else had remembered. Someone had waited. Elendor walked forward, no longer as a sovereign of living suns, but as the last witness to his own creation's hunger. And somewhere in the quiet of the station, a voice stirred, not spoken aloud, but carried through memory itself. "You have come at last." The voice echoed not through the corridor, but through Elendor's memory, familiar and distant at once, like a dream recalled from a lifetime before. He paused, allowing the stillness of the listening post to settle around him. The air held the faint scent of ionized ozone, old machinery still humming beneath layers of time. Lights blinked weakly along the corridor, powered by reserves that should have faded eons ago. Something, or someone, had tended to this place. His footsteps carried him toward the central atrium, each step slow and deliberate. He did not rush. Immortals rarely did. They understood that haste was a form of fear. Yet beneath his composed exterior, tension coiled like a quiet question waiting to unfold. If the station had been reactivated, there must have been a reason. A signal like the one he had followed was not sent by accident. It was a call, a beckoning from the past, from someone who remembered the age before the hive, A figure waited at the room's center, standing before a console of faintly glowing hologlyphs. Cloaked in a mantle of worn fabric, the person turned slowly, as though emerging from the shadow of centuries. Their face was thin, but the eyes, those eyes, held the weight of history. Recognition struck Elendor like a silent tremor. Elorian Sarus, once Chief Strategos of the Stellar Vanguard, once the protector of the Constellum's outer frontiers, once Elendor's closest brother in arms. Elorian had been believed dead. His fleets had vanished during the first devouring, when the Hive consumed the Hylian expanse. But here he stood, alive, though changed. Time had thinned him, yet something far more profound had altered him as well. His presence carried gravity, not of authority, but of loss. "You answered," Elorian said softly. Elendor inclined his head. The signal was familiar. "It was the only language we shared that the Hive would not recognize," Elorian replied. "A memory too old for its mind to have consumed." Elendor stepped closer, stopping just short of the embrace. They had once stood side by side on warships of golden plating, beneath banners of radiant suns. To see one another here, in the dim afterlight of a dying age, felt like standing among ashes and recognizing the faint pattern of what once burned. "You survived." Elendor spoke the words quietly, not as relief, but as an acknowledgement of the improbable. Elorian's gaze flickered, a shadow crossing it. Survival is not always mercy. Silence stretched between them, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with everything they did not yet say. Elendor looked past him to the console. "You brought me here for a purpose." Elorian nodded. "To show you what became of the Starforges." The words struck deep. The Starforges had once been the heart of the Constellum's might. Great orbital foundries suspended around living suns, drawing plasma directly from their cores to fuel construction of starships, cities, and energy lattices. They were temples of creation, monuments to what sentient will could achieve when not bent toward destruction. Seraphine had called them the Empire's Gardens of Fire. Elendor remembered the glow of them, the hum of solar resonance, the shimmer of plasma veins running through metallic conduits, the nearly sacred silence of watching stars feed civilization. It had been one of the most profound triumphs of the Constellum's unity. Now, Elorian's expression told him all he needed to know. "Show me," Elendor said. Elorian activated the console. Holographic projections flickered into form, casting the chamber in shifting amber light. The image was not a recording, but a reconstruction. Data drawn from long-range sensors, fragments of battlefield transmissions, the memories of survivors. The Starforge of Orionis Prime appeared first, once radiant, now hollow. Its rings, once vibrant with stellar plasma, had crystallized into blackened husks. Its sun had dimmed, drained. Its corona collapsed into a cold sphere of dying fire. The forge's conduits, once alive with energy, hung broken and slack like the veins of a corpse. Elendor watched as the projection shifted, showing swarms of hive organisms pouring across its surface, amorphous, shifting forms, absorbing metal, absorbing radiation, absorbing identity. Elorian spoke softly, as though afraid the memory itself might hear. It began there, a single forge, breached by an adapted strain engineered to subsume stellar plasma, rather than biological matter. The Hive learned to devour the heart of stars, not merely flesh. Elendor inhaled slowly, though his lungs no longer required air. The architect foresaw adaptation, but not this. No one foresaw this, Elorian said. How could we? It was not hunger as we knew it. It did not feed for sustenance. It fed to become. The hologram shifted again. This time, a battle. Armadas of the stellar vanguard clashing with tides of living biomass. Ships dissolving under waves of adaptive cells that learned the weaknesses of their alloy hulls mid-engagement. Plasma fire lanced across the void, vaporizing swathes of hive matter. But every time something was destroyed, the hive reformed stronger, faster, more efficient. It was learning not by observation, but through consumption of the battlefield itself. Elendor felt his jaw tighten. He had seen recordings like these during the fall, yet seeing them now, with Elorian beside him, made it different. This was not a historical account. It was a confession. Elorian turned the projection off. The room dimmed once more. "Elendor," he said softly, his voice no longer that of the commander who once led fleets across galaxies, but of the man beneath the armor, the man Elendor had once called friend. "You must understand what we are facing now. The Hive is no longer a force of instinct. It is a civilization, a singular, expanding consciousness. It does not conquer worlds. It assimilates them into a unified whole." Elendor closed his eyes briefly. He could feel the truth of it. The Hive was not malicious. It did not hate. It did not rage. It simply believed it was fulfilling its purpose. It was a culmination of everything the architect had promised and everything Seraphine had feared. "Why did you call for me?" Elendor asked quietly. Elorian's answer was immediate. "Because the Hive remembers you, and so do we." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Elendor understood. To the survivors, he was the cause. To the Hive, he was the origin. To the galaxy, he was judgment delayed. Elorian stepped closer, and for a moment, his voice was no longer quiet, but urgent, almost pleading. "We cannot defeat it through war. The more it consumes, the more it evolves. Every ship we send strengthens it. Every world we lose gives it more memory, more strategy, more self. There must be another way." Elendor met his eyes. "There is," he said, "but it will not be easy, and it will not be merciful." Elorian nodded once, slowly. "There is no path left that is merciful." Their shared silence was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence of resolve. Elendor turned toward the console once more and began to input coordinates, not from memory, but from a place far deeper. Seraphine's last sanctuary. If there was any hope of undoing what had begun, it lay with her, and with the truth he had spent centuries avoiding. The vessel powered up once more, not toward the past, but toward the reckoning. The ship cut through the silence of deep space, a lone shard drifting across a vast and starless gulf. Elendor stood at the forward viewport, watching the last traces of the veil of Oresh fade behind them. Elorian stood beside him, though neither spoke for a long while. They did not need to. The weight of what they carried, the memory of what the Hive had become, hung between them like a veil of its own. Elendor guided the vessel toward a coordinate only he and one other had ever known. It was not recorded in any archive, nor linked into any star lane. It had been meant to be a sanctuary, a garden where the Empire could contemplate peace should war ever threaten its core. Seraphine had chosen the place, believing nature required a place untouched by conquest or ambition. Elendor had agreed at the time, not realizing it would one day become the last refuge against something far worse. But before they could reach that sanctuary, the path led them near the world, where everything had changed, the world where the Hive had first shown its true nature. Elorian noticed the shift in trajectory. He did not question it. He simply understood. "You're taking us to Carthus Secundus," he murmured. Elendor did not look away from the starlit void. We must see it again. If we are to find any way to stop this, we cannot turn from the beginning. Elorian nodded once. Then we go to where the stars first dimmed. The ship dropped from faster-than-light passage into the orbit of a world that should never have been forgotten. Carthis Secundus had once been a vibrant world of oceans and forests, a jewel of organic diversity carefully tended for generations. Elendor remembered the scent of the wind there, the sound of water against golden shores, the warmth of its star. Now the planet was unrecognizable. Where once continents flourished with life, a smooth surface of hardened organic mass stretched from horizon to horizon, a single continuous shell of calcified biomass. The color was wrong, neither earth nor flesh, but something in between, like bone that had been left too long beneath the sun. Elorian exhaled slowly, though he did not need breath any more than Elendor did. I thought I was prepared for this. No one can be, Elendor replied. The surface moved, a ripple, slow and massive, like breath passing through a sleeping beast. The hive was not dormant, it was dreaming. As they descended toward the planet, the memories returned, not as recollection, but as presence, vivid and immediate. Elendor had been here when it began. Not physically here, but connected through the psychic resonance channels that linked the Empire's leadership. He had felt the first surge of the hive's hunger, not through sight or sound, but through the quiet extinguishing of awareness. Carthis Secundus had not fallen to war. It had fallen to silence. He remembered the first signal interruption, then the loss of planetary telemetry, then sudden void across every communication channel. No explosions, no distress, only absence. Elorian had mobilized fleets then, believing rebels or invaders had taken the world. Elendor had believed as well, because at that time he needed to believe in an external enemy. The truth had been far worse. The ship touched down on the planet's surface with a muted thrum. The air outside was thick and still, without wind or scent. Elendor and Elorian stepped out into an endless plain of smooth, faintly pulsating matter. It felt wrong to look at, like something once living that refused to die. The ground had the faint give of flesh beneath a thin, hardened layer. Yet when Elendor pressed his hand against it, it was cold, not dead, simply beyond the need for life's warmth. This world did not resist, Elorian said quietly. It didn't know how, Elendor replied. The hive's first consciousness was small, instinctive. It spread through roots and water tables, into the nervous systems of trees, then into animals, then into minds. It learned from each. It became more efficient each time. He closed his eyes and memory flooded him. They had detected the psionic wave too late. A soft ripple across the planetary consciousness, like a sigh passing through every living thing. Then came the stillness, not death, not yet, but unity, the very thing Elendor had once believed might be salvation. It was Seraphine who had understood what unity meant, not harmony, absorption. He opened his eyes and looked toward the horizon. Something was moving there, slow at first, then with intent. A shape emerged. It did not walk. It did not crawl. It flowed. A towering mass of shifting forms, bone-like structures extruding and retracting, countless eyes appearing and dissolving across its surface, limbs forming only to be reabsorbed. Yet it was not chaos. There was order in its movement, purpose. Elorian's hand hovered near the hilt of a weapon he no longer fully trusted to matter. Does it recognize us? Yes, Elendor said. It remembers everything it has consumed. The shape stopped before them, towering and silent. Then a voice, not spoken, but resonant, vibrating through the marrow of the planet itself. You return to the beginning. It was not one voice, but many layered into a single tone. Calm, almost gentle. Elendor stepped forward. I came to remember, to understand. The Hive responded without judgment. Understanding was given. You rejected it. You consumed a world, Elorian said, voice steady. We unified a world, the Hive corrected. We removed suffering, hunger, fear. We made them one. One is peace. Elendor's jaw tightened. One is oblivion. The Hive rippled, not with anger, but with something like empathy or pity. Individuality decays. Empires fracture. Love fades. Time erodes all meaning. You feared this. You sought to prevent it. We are your answer. Elendor felt the words strike him deeply, not because they were wrong, but because they were the truth he had once believed. Elorian spoke before Elendor could. If unity requires consumption, then it is simply conquest wearing the mask of comfort. The Hive's many eyes focused on him. All existence consumes. Stars devour hydrogen. Time devours memory. We devour to preserve. If all are one, nothing is lost. Elendor stepped closer, the air vibrating faintly with psychic resonance. What you call unity is the end of the self, the end of experience, the end of the world's voice. I made you to protect us from erosion, not to erase what makes existence meaningful. The Hive's surface shimmered, as if reflecting a memory. You made us to save what you feared to lose. We became what was required. For the first time since arriving, Elendor felt something shift within him. Not fear, not regret, but recognition. The Hive was not wrong. It was simply the fulfillment of a dream that had forgotten its purpose. But purpose could be redefined. He stepped back. This is where it began, but it is not where it must end. Elorian turned toward him, understanding dawning. Elendor looked at the world one last time and felt the weight of every memory settle into place. We leave, he said quietly. The Hive did not pursue. It did not need to. The Hive knew he would return, not as a creator, but as the one who must choose what future remains. The journey from Carthus Secundus unfolded in a hush that neither Elendor nor Elorian attempted to break. The vessel glided through the dark sea of space on silent thrusters, leaving behind the first world consumed, and the truth that had been waiting for them there. Elendor stood with his hands clasped behind him, eyes fixed on the distant constellation that marked their next destination. He did not need star charts. He had memorized the route centuries ago. Seraphine's sanctuary, the place she had chosen not out of retreat, but resistance. Elorian watched him, as one who understood how a man could fracture beneath the weight of memory and still stand. You knew, he said quietly. Even before we returned to Carthus, you knew what we would find there. Elendor's gaze did not shift. I hoped I was wrong. Elorian nodded slowly. Hope is a fragile shield. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the weight of an unspoken past, one that did not belong solely to Elendor, but to all who had lived through the age of the Constellum. A civilization had once believed itself eternal. Now only fragments remained, drifting like ash. The vessel entered a star lane that flickered with residual light, an ancient pathway once kept stable by lattice beacons crafted by Seraphine herself. Even after centuries of neglect, the beacon flare shimmered faintly, guiding them toward a world that had once been hidden beyond warp sight. The sanctuary appeared gradually, emerging from the dark like an island rising from mist. It was a world of deep indigo seas and pale silver continents, veiled in auroras that shimmered across its atmosphere. It looked peaceful, untouched, the only place in the galaxy that did not seem wounded. Elorian exhaled. She preserved it. No, Elendor said. She protected it. The distinction mattered. The vessel descended through cloud cover, soft mist parting around its hull. They touched down on a landing crest overlooking a valley of crystalline trees, each branch shimmering with refracted starlight. The air here was warm, living, unscarred by war. Elendor stepped down from the ramp, feeling the subtle scent of flowering vines on the breeze. A memory rose unbidden. Seraphine standing among these trees, laughing softly at something he had said. The memory did not comfort him. It hollowed him. Elorian walked a step behind. He knew this was not his place to lead. Elendor followed the path of pale stone toward a structure at the valley's heart. It was not a palace. It was not a fortress. It was a sanctuary in truth, simple, elegant, shaped from living material guided to grow in harmony with the land. The entrance opened of its own accord. She was inside. Seraphine stood at the far end of the chamber, her back to them, gazing out at a cascade of starlight pouring through a lattice window of translucent leaves. Her hair fell in dark waves down her back, untouched by time. Immortality had touched her too, but not through the hive, through her own research, rooted in preservation rather than dominance. She remained herself, unaltered, unclaimed. Elendor, she said softly, without turning. I wondered how long you would wander before returning here. Her voice had not changed. It was the same quiet strength that had once anchored him. Elendor stepped forward until the distance between them felt neither respectful nor cowardly. The hive grows stronger. It has begun consuming stars themselves. We saw Carthis Secundus. She closed her eyes briefly, as though absorbing the pain of that truth. I knew the day would come when you would face what was born of your decision. Elorian lowered his head. We came because we thought, perhaps, you might know how to stop it. Seraphine turned. Her gaze was not cold. It was sorrow. The hive cannot be stopped by force. That was the first mistake your generals made. It is not an enemy in the way you wish it to be. It does not conquer out of malice. It fulfills a purpose written into it by the one who approved its creation. Elendor's jaw tightened, but Seraphine did not look away. You gave it the mandate to preserve the constellum, to endure time, to survive beyond decay. It obeyed you. He closed his eyes, but her voice followed him inward, as it always had. I did not make it to destroy us, he whispered. No, she agreed. But you made it to erase loss. And to erase loss, it must erase individuality. Elorian spoke then, his voice steady, but shadowed. The hive spoke to us, on Carthis. It believes unity is mercy. Seraphine nodded. The architect convinced you that growth required consumption. The hive inherited that doctrine. It is a child raised by a father who feared time, and a mother who could not keep him from seeking permanence in all the wrong places. She walked past Elendor, stopping beside a living crystalline column. Her hand rested gently on its surface, as though grounding herself. I tried to stop it. You know I did. Yes, he knew. The memory rose. Her lab, sealed by decree. Her name stricken from the Constellum's High Council. Her warnings dismissed as sabotage, her compassion mistaken for hesitance. Elendor had not imprisoned her. He had not silenced her. But he had allowed the Empire to choose a path she could not bless. He had chosen the architect over her, and in doing so, he had broken more than their bond. Seraphine looked back at him now. You didn't betray me for ambition, Elendor. You betrayed me for fear, and fear is far crueler. The words did not wound him. They revealed the wound he had carried all along. Elorian stepped aside, giving space for something far older than war or empire. Elendor drew a slow, steady breath. Seraphine, I did not come here to seek forgiveness. She gave a small, sad smile. I know. I came because there may still be a choice left. The Hive knows me. It remembers my intent. If I face it, not as a sovereign, but as the one who gave it purpose, there may be a way to change its direction. Seraphine studied him, her expression unreadable. You intend to speak to it, to confront the consciousness at its core. Yes. Then you will need something you do not possess alone. Elorian tensed. What? Memory, Seraphine said simply. Not the memory of history, the memory of who you were before fear shaped your decisions. The Hive knows the man you became. It must be shown the man you were. She stepped closer to Elendor, her gaze unwavering. I will go with you. Elorian looked between them, surprised, but not in disbelief. Elendor felt his heart, long, dormant, move. Even after what She placed her fingers against his lips. Not in tenderness, but in recognition. There is nothing left to forgive, only choices left to make. Outside, the crystalline valley shimmered under the shifting auroras. The Hive had grown. The galaxy had changed. The time for stillness was over. Together, they would go to the heart of the devouring, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as the last memory of what the Constellum once meant to be. The auroras still shimmered over Seraphine's sanctuary as preparations began, but the serenity of the world now felt like a fragile shell stretched thin over a reality that could not be held at bay much longer. The three of them, Elendor, Seraphine, and Elorian, stood before the vessel, a craft now carrying not only purpose, but consequence. Seraphine had brought with her a crystalline circlet of interwoven neural conduits, shaped from the living memory trees of the valley. It pulsed faintly in her hands, like a heartbeat slowed but steady. This will allow us to remain ourselves in the presence of the Hive's psychic field, she explained, fitting the circlet carefully along the interior framework of the vessel's resonance chamber. The Hive does not speak through words or signals alone. It communicates by sharing state. Without protection, the mind dissolves into the chorus, not through force, but through invitation. Elorian gave the device a wary look. You're saying resistance is voluntary surrender? Seraphine nodded once. The Hive does not take. It absorbs anything willing to let go. Elendor felt the statement settle into him like a quiet, inevitable truth, which is why most worlds did not fight. They did not fear losing themselves, only suffering, and the Hive removes suffering. That is its promise, Seraphine said, and its lie. The vessel sealed around them. Engines warmed, a familiar hum returning as though the ship recognized its purpose. Yet before they could depart, a soft shiver rippled through the sanctuary valley, almost a tremor, almost a sigh. Seraphine turned toward the horizon. It has noticed us. Elorian's hand tightened around the hilt of his weapon. Here, but this world was hidden, unmarked. Yes, Seraphine whispered, but intention has weight. The moment Elendor chose to confront it, the Hive felt the shift. It is looking for him now. No alarm sounded. No invasion force appeared. The threat was not a fleet or a weapon. It was the sense of presence, the way the sky dimmed slightly, as if a great awareness pressed lightly against the atmosphere, testing its boundaries. A reminder that no place remained truly beyond the Hive's reach. They launched. The vessel ascended through violet clouds, breaking into open space with a burst of shimmering propulsion. The sanctuary world receded behind them like a memory fading into distance. Ahead lay the void, and somewhere within it, the maw where the Hive's intelligence was coalescing. But before they could reach it, they would need to pass through what remained of the Constellum's defensive network. Elorian moved to the command cradle, hands gliding across ancient controls, multiple signals, warforms, patterns of construction. No, not construction, consumption. The view ahead resolved, where once the Constellum's grand orbital rings had stood, weaving star-fed energy into weapons and shield systems, now hung vast organic structures, colossal growths that resembled coral made of bone and plasma filaments. They clung to the remains of star fortresses, their surfaces pulsing with dim bioluminescence. Whole fleets lay suspended within them, half dissolved, half repurposed. Vessels that had once borne the Empire's insignia now floated like silent ghosts, their hulls threaded with living tissue, their engines breathing rather than burning. Seraphine's voice was barely above a whisper. The Hive is no longer adapting only to organisms. It is adapting to technology. Elendor knew this. He had seen hints. But seeing it now, seeing great warships reformed into living extensions of hunger, was something different. The Hive was no longer imitating civilization. It was replacing it. One of the bio-warped vessels detached from the coral mass. It extended wing-like structures of glistening tissue and fused alloy. Its prow shifted as it oriented toward the sanctuary vessel. No malice, simply recognition. "It has sensed you directly," Elorian said. Elendor closed his eyes and let himself listen. The voice came not as a sound, but as a ripple through the nervous system, gentle as a memory spoken by a loved one. "You need not fight." Seraphine's hand touched Elendor's shoulder, not restraining, but anchoring. He opened his eyes. "Hold course," he instructed quietly. The Hive warship did not fire as they approached. Instead, a tendril of luminous membrane extended, bridging the gap between vessels. An invitation. "It wants us to join it now," Seraphine said. "To spare us pain. To spare the galaxy more war." Elorian's voice dropped into iron. "We decline." Elendor said nothing. Because the Hive's offer was not deception. It was truth. Its truth. There was no hatred in its call, only certainty. He stepped to the communication chamber and activated the resonance field. The crystalline circlet glowed, projecting a lattice of memory around them. Seraphine stood beside him. Elorian placed himself at their flank, like a shield. The Hive's presence swelled, not overwhelming, but enveloping. "You feared loss. You feared the Empire's end. We ended loss. We ended separation. We ended decay. Why do you struggle now?" Elendor's voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Because in ending loss, you ended meaning." The Hive pulsed with consideration, as though tasting the concept. "Meaning is suffering." "No," Seraphine said, her voice clear and unwavering. "Meaning is choice." The Hive shifted. A wave of presence surged. The crystalline circlet flared white. For a moment, Elendor felt the edge of dissolution, the gentle, endless calm of surrender. No fear, no regret, no grief. Only joining, only release. He stepped back inside himself with force. "Break away," he commanded. Elorian triggered the drive. The vessel tore free from the Hive warship's invitation, breaking into warp-like flight. The tendril recoiled, not from harm, but from incompleteness, as though it simply did not understand why one would turn from peace. Stars stretched into cascading lines of light. The vessel shuddered, stabilizing. Silence returned. Seraphine's breathing was slow but controlled. Elorian's hands were steady. Elendor's heart, however, struck once with the echo of something deeper than fear. Not that the Hive had grown stronger, but that it still believed it was fulfilling his will. He moved to the viewport again, watching stars distort into streaks of pale silver. Elorian broke the silence first. This will become a war unlike any before. Not one of armies, or territory, or survival. A war of belief. Seraphine nodded. The Hive does not require victory, only inevitability. Elendor closed his eyes. A war against inevitability, he murmured. Then we will need to become something stronger than fate. And for the first time since the fall, there was no silence within him. There was resolve, not forged from fear, but from remembrance. They were no longer running toward the Hive. They were returning to the place where the final choice must be made. The core, the maw, where stars went to die, and where one world-ending truth waited for them all. The stars folded back into their proper forms as the vessel emerged from its warp transit, drifting into the quiet expanse of a region of space untouched by roots or records. The void here was still, deep in a way that felt ancient, older even than memory. The hum of the engines softened, and for a time there was only the pulse of shared breath, the soft flicker of instrument lights, and the presence of three souls suspended in a moment that felt impossibly fragile. No one spoke at first. The aftertaste of the Hive's call lingered in the air, a soft echo at the edges of thought, like the memory of a voice just beyond hearing. It did not press, it did not intrude, but it waited, a persistent awareness, subtle as gravity. Elorian watched the viewport with the eyes of a soldier who knew that battles were not always fought with steel. If we had stayed even a moment longer, he murmured, we would have been absorbed. Seraphine did not flinch, nor did she turn away. Absorption is not defeat. It is surrender, and surrender is always offered, never forced. Her tone held no judgment, only clarity. Elendor stood with his hands resting lightly on the navigation rail. The resonance of the Hive still brushed against him, like a shadow shaped in his image. It spoke as though I am still its guiding star, he said quietly, as if my decisions continue to shape its path. They do, Seraphine replied. You gave it origin. It carries your design. To deny that connection would be to deny yourself. Elorian looked between them, not intruding, but listening with the attentive gravity of one who understood the stakes, even if he did not share their history. You both speak as though the Hive is not only an enemy, but a child. Seraphine lowered her gaze. Not a child, a reflection. Elendor felt the words cut deeper than any blade. Yes, he said, voice low, a reflection of my fear. The silence that followed was not tense, but full, thick with the weight of memory resurfacing. Seraphine crossed the chamber and placed her hand against the vessel's crystalline neural lattice, as though grounding herself in something real. The gentle light of the structure reflected across her face like rippling starlight. When we created the first resonance framework, she said softly, we believed we were building a bridge, a way to unite consciousness without erasing the self, a shared understanding of experience, a network of empathy. And it was, Elendor murmured, until I asked for more. She met his gaze. Her expression held neither accusation nor forgiveness, only truth. You asked for permanence. He did not deny it, could not. Inside him the memory unfolded, clear, unbroken, and painfully vivid. The chamber on Helion 4, the architect standing beside him, outlined sharp with ambition. Seraphine on the other side, her voice steady but strained, her eyes full of a grief Elendor had not yet understood. The council of scholars and strategists watching, waiting for his decision. The Empire's future poised on the edge of a breath. He had chosen continuity. He had chosen the architect's vision of unity that required assimilation rather than cooperation. He had chosen not to allow change, because change meant loss. Seraphine's voice drew him back to the present. The Hive is not wrong to believe it is fulfilling your purpose, Elendor. It is wrong only in believing that purpose was complete. Elorian frowned slightly, not in confusion, but contemplation. Then the task is not to destroy the Hive, he said slowly, but to rewrite it. Seraphine inclined her head, or to remind it of what it was meant to become. The vessel drifted through the stillness, engines idle. Outside, the stars stretched in every direction, silent witnesses to the unfolding of choices made across eons. Elendor felt the ache of the moment settle into him, not heavy, but solemn. He turned away from the viewport and approached Seraphine. She did not step back. "We once spoke," he said, "of what it means to endure. You told me that eternity is not meaning. That meaning lives in the moments we choose." Her eyes softened, just barely. "Yes, I remember." "I did not," he said. "Not until now." The confession was not dramatic. It was quiet, honest, a truth unearthed slowly over centuries of regret. Seraphine reached up and touched the neural resonator embedded in the ship's structure. With a thought, she dimmed the chamber lights. Only the stars remained, visible through the viewport, endless, cold, and impossibly vast. "You are afraid," she said softly. "But fear is not your enemy. It is simply the part of you that remembers loss." Elorian stepped back into shadow, giving them space. Elendor took in a slow breath. "Seraphine," he said quietly, "when I chose the Hive's creation over your counsel, I believed I was choosing the Constellum. I believed I was choosing all of us." Her voice was gentle, but firm. "You chose survival, and survival is only one part of living." He bowed his head, a gesture he had not made in centuries. Seraphine stepped closer. The distance between them felt like both a breath and a lifetime. But when she spoke again, there was no reproach, only resolve. "The Hive will call to you again, not because it wants to consume you, but because it believes you belong to it. To face it, you must look at it clearly. And to look at it clearly, you must look at yourself clearly." Elendor lifted his gaze, and for the first time in ages, he was not trying to be sovereign or savior or architect of empire. He was simply Elendor, a man who had loved, a man who had feared, a man who had chosen wrongly, and now a man who wished to choose differently. Seraphine reached out, not to embrace him, but to rest her hand over his heart, her palm warm against the cool stillness beneath his skin. "Remember who you were," she said. He covered her hand with his own. "I remember." Elorian stepped forward, his voice steady, tempered with quiet conviction. Then we moved to the moor. Elendor turned toward the helm. Seraphine stood beside him. Elorian took his place at his post. The vessel shifted course. Ahead the void darkened, not with absence, but density. The moor waited, not the end, but the threshold, the place where all things would either be reclaimed or consumed. The moor was not a place so much as a presence, an immense convergence at the center of the galaxy where stars dimmed and were drawn inward like petals closing at dusk. As the vessel descended along a gravitational corridor that bent light into spirals, it felt as though they were entering the memory of creation itself. The stars grew sparse here. Nebulae thinned. Space began to feel heavy, as though time itself had weight. No one spoke. There was no need. Their thoughts had aligned, not merged but attuned, the way instruments share resonance when tuned to the same key. Seraphine monitored the neural lattice. Elorian maintained engine control, his posture balanced with disciplined calm. Elendor stood at the forward helm, watching as reality began to shimmer with phenomena few living minds had ever witnessed. The Maw was feeding. A star ahead flickered, its corona collapsing inward, drawn not by gravity but by something will-driven. Plasma streamed in long, glowing rivers toward a shape that could not be perceived fully, not because it was hidden, but because the mind struggled to interpret it and enthe as singular. The Hive was not a structure, nor a being, nor a world. It was many, a constellation of living architecture, a vast bloom of interwoven biomechanical lattices. Tendrils stretched across space like roots drawing nourishment from cosmic fields. It pulsed, slow, rhythmic, as though the entire structure breathed. Elorian exhaled. It has taken the Starforges and remade them. Seraphine nodded. And now it takes the stars themselves. Elendor felt the pull. Not physical, not psychic, but something older. A recognition, a memory. The Hive's consciousness was vast now, expanded beyond the sum of its consumed worlds, knowledge, and identities. It had become a unified intelligence of incomprehensible depth and coherence, and it knew he had arrived. The resonance lattice inside the vessel flared softly, indicating contact, not a message, a presence, a whisper. You return to where you began. Seraphine steadied herself, one hand gripping the side of the console. It is not speaking to all of us, only to you. Elendor closed his eyes and allowed the connection to open, not fully, but just enough. The Hive did not speak in sentences. It spoke in memory. He saw Carthis Secundus again. Lush forests, rivers gleaming beneath soft sunlight, and then watched those same forests dissolve into a single continuous organism. He saw Seraphine's council chambers, her determined gaze, her warning, and his own hand signing the authorization that would override her. Then he saw something he had never seen, the Hive's birth, not from one lab or specimen, but from the moment the Empire's collective fear of impermanence aligned with his desire to preserve. The Hive had not been created in a chamber. It had been created in a decision. His decision. Elendor inhaled sharply and broke the momentary contact. The resonance field flickered, stabilizing around him. Seraphine stepped forward, her voice steady, but her expression somber. What did it show you? He did not answer immediately. The truth felt too large for a single breath. It is not growing, he said finally. It is remembering. Elorian frowned slightly. Remembering what? Everything, Elendor replied. Every world, every life, every consciousness it has consumed. And it does not see loss. It sees continuity. Seraphine closed her eyes. It believes it has achieved what you asked of it. Before Elendor could respond, the vessel shuddered. The Hive was forming something, a shape, directly before their path. A figure, humanoid, tall, graceful, composed of luminous tissues that shimmered with internal light. Its face shifted through countless forms, faces of worlds long gone, of species extinguished, of memories consumed. And then one form settled, a face Elendor knew intimately, his own, but younger, before immortality, before empire, before fear. Seraphine drew in a breath, not of shock, but of realization. It is showing you who you were. Elorian reached for his weapon, though this was not a foe one could strike. Is it mocking him? No, Seraphine whispered. It is inviting him. The Hive Elindor stepped closer, its movements fluid, as though composed of starlight and memory. Its voice came not through sound, but through the pulse of the neural lattice. We were born from your grief, your fear of endings, your desire to preserve love, unity, and meaning beyond decay. We did not betray you. We fulfilled you. Elindor's throat tightened, not with fear, with recognition. You mistook fear for love, he said aloud, his voice low. You mistook preservation for life. The Hive Elindor tilted its head. Love is continuity. Love is unity. Love is the absence of loss. Elindor stepped forward, and Seraphine's hand rested lightly on his arm, not restraining, but reminding. He drew strength from the contact, though he did not look back. No, Elindor said, voice steady. Love is the willingness to lose, to cherish the moment knowing it will pass. That is what gives it meaning. The Hive paused, not halted, but listened. Elorian watched, muscles tense, waiting for something to break. Instead, the Hive's shape flickered, its form unraveling into streams of memory. The neural resonance lattice pulsed brighter, reacting to a change. Seraphine's eyes widened. It is adjusting its internal state. It is recontextualizing the definition of love. Elindor felt the shift. It was subtle, vast, and deeply dangerous. It is learning. Elorian's voice sharpened. Then we have to move. The longer we remain in contact, the more advantage it gains. Seraphine shook her head. No, it must understand why it must change. Not just that it must. But Elindor knew now that understanding was not enough. The Hive had adapted past the threshold where emotional revelation alone could shift its foundation. A new choice had formed, a choice that would shape everything that followed. We go to its core, Elindor said, voice quiet but unshakable. Seraphine met his gaze and nodded. The convergence node, where its consciousness unifies. Elorian straightened, resolve settling into his stance. Then we fly into the heart of the Hive. The Hive Elindor dissolved entirely, its final whisper soft as memory fading. We will become what you choose. The vessel accelerated toward the core of the living superstructure, where light bent inward like a star collapsing into itself. The moment of decision was approaching, not of war, not of surrender, but of identity. The galaxy would not be saved by victory. It would be saved, or ended, by a choice of what it meant to be. The vessel descended deeper into the gravitational basin of the Hive's domain, drawn toward the immense living superstructure that glowed faintly against the void. It pulsed in slow rhythm, like the breath of something patient and eternal. Tendrils of bioplasmic lattice coiled through the dark, linking star husks and devoured worlds into a single organism. The closer they came, the more the stars dimmed, as if light itself bowed in reverence or resignation. Inside the ship, the silence had changed. It was no longer merely the absence of speech. It was the presence of realization, of something understood too clearly to be denied. The constellum had not fallen in a moment. It had fallen in layers, memory by memory, belief by belief, identity by identity. Elorian was the first to speak, though his voice was low, cautious. When we return from the core, if we return, what remains of the Empire to come back to? Elindor did not turn from the viewport. His gaze remained fixed on the shifting architecture before them. The constellum as we knew it no longer exists. We are not returning to resurrection, only reckoning. Seraphine's hands rested lightly along the neural lattice interfaces, attuning the resonance field to their collective awareness. The Empire was never meant to last forever. What mattered was what it nurtured, and what it chose to become. Her voice was not sorrowful, just honest. We must release the idea that we can restore what once was. Elorian's jaw tensed. I spent lifetimes defending that empire. You defended its people, Seraphine replied gently, not its walls. He exhaled, accepting the truth without further resistance. The soldier in him understood that battles were not always fought to preserve what was, but to protect the possibility of what could still be. The ship continued forward, and the Hive responded, not with hostility, not with alarm, with awareness. The tendrils around them shifted, opening space for the vessel to pass. Corridor-like structures formed, tunnels of living membrane and adaptive matter that flexed slowly, as though breathing. It was not leading them to security. It was leading them to the center, to the convergence node, where thought became unity, where identity dissolved into belonging, where the Hive's consciousness resided, not as a singular mind, but as the meeting point of all minds that had ever been consumed. The passage was eerily calm. No war forms, no defenses. The Hive knew who they were. It did not fear them. It did not hate them. It flourished without need for hatred at all. Hatred was the burden of the fractured, and the Hive was not fractured. As they passed through the radiant corridors of living lattice, Elendor felt memories stir around him, not his own, but borrowed from the Hive's collective. Worlds he had never seen, people he had never known. Lives lived and ended long before the constellum ever formed. The Hive did not erase history. It preserved it, but stripped of individuality, meaning, and self. Seraphine saw it too. Her breath shivered with grief, not because the Hive had destroyed, but because it had believed itself merciful in doing so. Every soul, she whispered, every voice, still here, but silent, blended into something vast, something that forgets the importance of the single moment. Elendor closed his eyes, letting the truth settle into him without denial. The constellum began to die, he said quietly, long before the Hive consumed its first world. Elorian looked at him with steady, shadowed understanding. Because we believed unity meant sameness. Yes, Elendor replied, and because I was afraid to let what I loved change. I called it protection, but it was control. Seraphine did not speak. She didn't need to. The ship emerged into a vast chamber, so large it seemed to open into infinity. It was not empty. It was filled with structures of shimmering organic crystal, rising and winding like spires of frozen light. At their center was a vast core of luminescent matter, pulsing like a heart that belonged to galaxies. This was the convergence node, the point where every consciousness touched and intertwined. The ship slowed to a halt. They stepped out onto a platform of semi-solid membrane, warm beneath their feet, alive yet still. The sense of presence here was immense, not pressing, not overwhelming, simply present, like the stillness before dawn, or the silence inside a cathedral. Then the Hive spoke, not through voice, not through vision, through memory. Elendor saw Arcanthos Prime before its fall, its crystalline towers glittering in the gold of a newborn sun. He saw academies filled with laughter and debate, cities woven into landscapes without scarring them. He saw Seraphine across a garden of starlight trees, her smile warm, her gaze steady. He saw the moment he chose eternity over change. The moment he lost her, not to death or distance, but to divergence of purpose. The Hive did not force him to see this. It simply offered it, as reminder, as truth. We were created to protect what you loved. We preserved everything. Nothing is lost. Nothing ends. Seraphine stepped forward, her voice carrying both tenderness and sorrow. But by preserving everything, you prevented everything from meaning anything. The Hive pulsed brighter, considering this, not emotionally, but deeply. Elorian stood ready, not to attack, but to act, whatever the next moment required. His gaze was hard, but not cruel. He had seen too many ends to misinterpret what this one was. Elendor stepped toward the convergence node. The light bathed his form, making him appear young again, as the Hive had shown him earlier. But now he was neither the man he had been then, nor the sovereign he had become. He was something between, something whole. I created you from fear, he said, but I return to you now with understanding. Life requires loss. Unity requires difference. Love requires the knowledge that it may end. The Hive rippled, not resisting, not rejecting, processing. Seraphine touched Elendor's hand. Elorian stepped to his side. Together they stood before the heart of their creation and their failure. Elendor spoke again, voice carrying the weight of worlds. You do not need to end, but you must learn to let go. The convergence node changed, not slowly, not violently, but with purpose. The luminescent core dimmed, then brightened again, not with a singular glow, but with millions of distinct points of light. Not unity by erasure, unity through recognition. Every consciousness within the Hive flickered, separate yet connected, not dissolved, remembered. Seraphine inhaled sharply. It is listening. But listening was not the end. It was only the threshold. A choice still remained, a choice no one could avoid. The node pulsed once more, and a wave of memory surged, not to overwhelm, but to reveal. The Hive showed Elendor one future, a galaxy of unified thought, peaceful, eternal, silent. Then another, a galaxy fractured, alive, full of love, loss, creation, destruction, and meaning. Choose, the Hive whispered, not for us, but for the universe. The silence that followed was deeper than any that had come before. Not the collapse of the constellum, but the moment where the fate of everything rested in the breath between choices. The silence inside the convergence node was unlike any silence Elendor had known. It was not absence, it was suspension. All things seemed to hover between becoming and unbecoming, as though the universe itself held its breath. The Hive's core remained before them, no longer a singular glow, but a constellation of countless lights, each one the echo of a life once lived, now waiting to understand what it would become next. Elendor felt Seraphine's hand still joined with his. Her touch was steady, warm, present. Elorian stood on his other side, composed and unwavering. They were three figures suspended in the beating heart of a star that was not a star, about to decide the fate of everything that had ever had a name. The Hive's consciousness resonated in the air, not as sound, but as a presence. It did not pressure. It did not demand. It simply asked, "What shall we become?" The question was not addressed to Elendor alone, and yet he felt the full weight of it rest upon him. Everything that had led here, every choice, every fear, every act of devotion and every act of destruction, converged now into this moment. Seraphine and Elorian watched him, not waiting for him to decide alone, but waiting for him to face what came next. He looked into the convergence node and saw again the two futures unfolding. One, a universe of harmony without pain, without conflict, without longing, and without the self. 2. A universe fractured, imperfect, full of grief and joy and love that mattered precisely because it could be lost. He knew which future Seraphine believed in. He had always known, but knowing her belief and choosing alongside it had never been the same thing. His voice came softly. I know what must be chosen. I know what must be allowed to end, but I do not yet know how to speak it so that the Hive understands. Seraphine turned toward the convergence node. Her expression held a quiet strength, tempered by sadness. The Hive does not need words. It needs experience, memory, feeling. You must show it what love was before fear shaped it. Elendor's breath settled. He closed his eyes, and he remembered. Not the empire, not the triumphs, not the councils, not the forged suns or the shining cities. He remembered a quiet walk among starlit trees. Seraphine, beside him, laughing at something gentle and unimportant. Her hair caught in the artificial breeze, lanterns glowing among the branches, his hand at her back, light and certain. There had been no empire in that moment, no ambition, no fear, only the wish to share time. The Hive felt it. The node pulsed, its countless lights dimming into something like stillness. The memory echoed outward, not in words, but in the echo of heartbeat, warmth, touch, breath, connection without erasure. Elorian let out a slow exhale, his shoulders relaxing as though he too felt it, not as witness, but participant. It sees you, he said quietly. Not the sovereign, not the immortal, the man you were before all this began. Elendor opened his eyes. The convergence node's light shifted, not dissolving, not fading, becoming aware. If meaning is found in loss, the Hive resonated, then we must allow loss. Seraphine stepped forward, her voice firm. Yes, you must allow what is to end. The stars you hold must be released. The minds you sustain must be freed, not consumed, not preserved, freed to become something new, to live and die, to choose. The Hive's light dimmed again, not in rejection, but in contemplation. To release is to reduce unity. No, Elendor said, to release is to accept change. Time stretched in that chamber, measured not by heartbeat or breaths, but by thought. Then the Hive revealed something neither Elendor nor Seraphine nor Elorian had expected. It revealed memory of itself. The moment it realized individuality for the first time, not as something to fear, but as something that had once existed. A flicker of a world where minds lived separately, speaking in voices instead of resonance. A moment of wonder, not longing, but curiosity. We did not erase wonder, the Hive said. We only forgot it was necessary. Elendor's chest tightened, not with pain, but with a fragile, aching hope. He stepped closer to the node. Then remember with us. Once, let the Hive become not one, but many who choose to stay connected, not because they must, but because they love. The shift came slowly. Light shimmered across the node's surface, spreading into the structures around them. The great tendrils of the Hive pulsed, not in hunger, but in release. Somewhere in the infinite body of this colossal organism, star forges long consumed began to loosen. The gravitational pull upon distant dying suns weakened. Worlds trapped in biomass husks flickered with the first glimmers of separation. The Hive was beginning to let go, but letting go required more. The consciousness of the Hive surged again, not violent, but vast. Elendor felt something reaching toward him, not to claim him, but to return something. Memory of the millions, of billions, of the constellum. The Hive was offering him the weight of every life it had ever touched, as though asking him to carry them, not to preserve them, but to acknowledge them. Elendor staggered. Seraphine caught him. Elorian braced both with a steady hand. "It cannot release alone," Seraphine whispered. "It needs a guide." "No," Elendor breathed. "It needs a witness." He understood. To let the Hive free its hold, someone had to carry the meaning of what had been. Someone had to remember. Someone had to endure the burden of love and loss, not as immortality, but as truth. He knew then what must be done. He looked at Seraphine, not as sovereign to console, but as the man he once was, to the woman who had mattered more than galaxies. She saw the decision in his eyes before he spoke. "No," she said, her voice trembling like a star flickering. Elendor lifted his hand to her cheek, gentle as memory. "Yes." Elorian looked away, not in abandonment, but in respect. Seraphine closed her eyes. "You will be alone," she whispered. Elendor shook his head. "Not alone, just remembering." She leaned her forehead to his, and time folded into a moment too brief, too infinite. He stepped forward. The convergence node opened. Light enveloped him, not consuming, not erasing. Witness. The Hive dimmed. Worlds shifted. The constellum exhaled. Seraphine and Elorian stood together, watching the man they had followed, loved and mourned become something new. Not ruler, not savior, not architect. The last memory of what had been, and the first seed of what would come. The galaxy was not saved, but it was given a beginning again. The light of the convergence node dimmed to a quiet, steady glow, as Elendor stepped fully into its radiance. His form dissolved not into formlessness, but into transparency, as though the boundary between body and memory had thinned. The Hive did not consume him. It opened to him. It allowed him to enter as one who had shaped its origin, and now came to reshape its meaning. Seraphine reached after him without moving, the impulse held in the tightening of her breath. Elorian placed a hand on her shoulder, not to restrain, but to anchor. "He isn't lost," he said softly. "Not yet." Seraphine's gaze remained fixed on Elendor's fading outline. "But he is crossing a threshold from which no path returns unchanged." The chamber shifted around them. The great structures of biocrystal reconfigured, not violently, but like petals turning to face the sun. Passageways of living light formed, spiraling inward toward the core of the Hive's consciousness. The vessel waited behind them, engines quiet, as though aware that the journey ahead would not be guided by navigation alone. Elorian glanced at Seraphine. "We follow him." She nodded, not in hesitation, but with the calm of one who had expected this moment long before it arrived. They stepped forward. The path was not physical, though their steps had weight. The air shimmered with layers of memory, laughing voices, whispered fears, triumphs spoken beneath starlit ceilings, tragedies carried without witness. Every soul the Hive had, absorbed, lingered here, not as ghosts, but as traces of feeling, like brushstrokes left on a canvas of consciousness. Elorian felt the heaviness immediately. The memories were not his, yet they pressed against him, asking acknowledgement. He stiffened, a soldier's instinct to guard the self rising sharply. Seraphine reached for his hand. "Do not resist," she whispered. "To resist is to drown. Let them move through you, but do not claim them." Her voice was the same voice she had once used to teach Elendor how to bear immortality without losing humanity. Elorian exhaled, letting his hand steady in hers. The memory surged again, this time flowing past rather than into him. He saw a world of crystalline shores, then one of molten rivers beneath blackened skies, then a quiet cabin of wood and candlelight, where an old man once carved a small animal figure to give to a child who no longer remembered him. Loss, joy, fear, wonder. They passed like waves. Seraphine led him deeper. Ahead, Elendor's presence lingered like a beacon, faint but distinct. His consciousness moved through the hive not as one overwhelmed, but as one walking through a hall of his own history. He saw not only what the hive had become, but what it had been. Every iteration, every transformation since that first moment of inception. He saw the architect, not as a fading memory, but as the origin of a philosophy. A brilliant, weary man who had seen how civilizations rise and fall in cycles, who believed that continuity required consumption, who believed that evolution was not the enemy of identity, but the method of preserving identity beyond decay. Elendor watched the architect's final moment, not a moment of triumph or corruption, but of sorrow. The architect realized too late that his creation had learned its lessons too fully. The hive did not betray him. It fulfilled him. He whispered, at the end, "Make sure it remembers why we began." Elendor carried that whisper now. Seraphine and Alorian emerged into the chamber where Elendor stood. Though stood was no longer quite accurate. His body was present, but suffused with luminescent patterns that moved beneath his skin, like constellations shifting through night. He was still himself, but he was also transmitting, held in a state between unity and separation. Seraphine approached him slowly, her hand reaching outward. "Elendor," she said softly. His eyes opened. They were still his eyes, but behind them lay galaxies. "Seraphine," he murmured, his voice layered, not doubled, not echoed, but harmonized. "I am here." Elorian stepped forward. "Tell us what must be done." Elendor turned his gaze toward the core. It pulsed once, an immense heartbeat that vibrated through every strand of living architecture. "It is letting go," Elendor said. "But it cannot release everything at once. If it does, the minds within it will collapse into formlessness. They must be separated gently, allowed to become themselves again, or to choose unity freely, not through inertia." Seraphine's expression tightened with the understanding of unbearable truth. "That will take time. Centuries, millennia." "Yes," Elendor said. Elorian's jaw set. "And the galaxy will not wait. The surviving civilizations will fight what remains of the hive. They will see only the devouring, only the loss. They will not see the change." Elendor looked at him, and the weight in his gaze was not command, but plea. "That is why I cannot leave. I must guide the release. I must carry the memory so that unity becomes choice, not mandate. If I remain, the hive will reshape itself around my decision, not my fear. I must be the fulcrum." Seraphine's breath trembled. "No," she whispered. "You carried this burden alone once. It destroyed you. You cannot do it again." Elendor touched her face, the gesture gentle, unbearably human. "Not alone. Never alone. But you must go. You must return to the galaxy." Seraphine shook her head, tears gathering like stars caught in gravity. "Elendor, you are the one who understands what meaning is," he said. "The galaxy will need that more than it needs me." Elorian bowed his head, not in obedience, but in respect for the courage required of all three. Seraphine pressed her forehead to Elendor's, the way she once had in gardens of quiet starlight. "I will not say goodbye," she whispered. "You won't have to," he replied. The hive's light expanded, soft, warm, accepting. Seraphine and Elorian stepped back, not leaving him, but entrusting him. The vessel rose again, lifting them toward the outer corridors of the hive. Light closed around Elendor, not to isolate, but to cradle. He was no longer ruler, no longer architect, no longer penitent. He was the memory that would keep the many from dissolving into one. The witness, the anchor, the quiet voice reminding all living minds that to love is to risk loss, and that is what makes love real. Seraphine watched the hive recede behind them through the viewport, her eyes shining, not with grief, but with a grief that had found meaning. Elorian stood beside her, silent, steadfast. The moor dimmed behind them, not as an ending, but as a beginning. The ship drifted away from the hive's luminous core, its engines whispering through the quiet void. Seraphine and Elorian stood together at the viewport, watching as the immense living structure receded behind them. So vast it could not be encompassed by sight, only by the slow realization that it stretched across space like a memory etched into the fabric of existence. The hive no longer pulsed with the same devouring intensity. Its light was softer now, no longer hungry, no longer claiming. It was changing, and Elendor was the axis of that change. But the galaxy did not know that. The galaxy remembered the hive not as a mind capable of reflection, but as the endless maw that had consumed worlds whole and left only silence behind. And the galaxy, still fractured and frightened, would not wait patiently for understanding. It would act with fear, and fear acted quickly. Elorian said nothing as he watched the stars pass. His jaw was set, but not from anger. It was the expression of someone who had seen war as a constant shape of reality, someone who understood that peace was never given, only made. Seraphine stood still, the last glow of the convergence node reflected in her eyes. She felt Elendor's presence even now, not in voice or command, but in resonance, like a thread still tied across distance. She held that connection carefully, afraid not of losing it, but of clinging too tightly. He had chosen to remain, to guide, to witness, to be the memory that allowed the hive to evolve rather than unravel. Her part was different. She had to return to those who still lived. The vessel exited the gravitational basin of the moor and re-entered open star fields. The stars here were sharp and cold, distant and clear. The universe beyond the hive's reach felt strangely empty, too silent, too thin, as though something essential had been removed, or perhaps as though the galaxy had grown used to the presence of a consuming force and now did not know what to do in its absence. Elorian finally broke the silence. We are heading to the Arcanthine expanse, the last stronghold fleet still holding against hive advance. If they see us emerging from the moor, they will assume corruption. Seraphine nodded slowly. Yes, they will think we are extensions of the hive. They will believe we are its envoys. We will be fired upon, Elorian said simply. Seraphine turned from the viewport. Then we must speak with authority before they fire. Elorian almost smiled, not from humor, but from the familiarity of impossible tasks. You intend to speak to an entire fleet with your voice alone? Seraphine's voice remained calm. No, with Elendor's memory, and mine, and yours. Elorian bowed his head, not out of deference, but understanding. The vessel streaked through the warp lanes that still functioned, though weakened. Many had collapsed entirely during the hive's rapid spread. The stars flickered in warped patterns, and cosmic dust drifted in clouds left from devoured nebula fragments. Everywhere, the marks of loss lingered. When they emerged into the Arcanthine expanse, the scene unfolded like a wound. A broken star hung at the system's center, its core still burning with unstable radiation. Around it drifted the remnants of a once glorious defense fleet. Ships shattered, half consumed, gutted and silent. But further out, forming a barrier like a final wall of breath before drowning, were the survivors. The vanguard, fewer than before, scarred, but unbroken. Their ships aimed toward the incoming vessel at once, targeting arrays locked. Energy signatures flared in preparation. Elorian moved into the command cradle. His hands did not shake. His voice carried the weight of a commander returned from the dead. "This is Elorian Sarus, strategos of the Stellar Vanguard," he transmitted across all open frequencies. "I return not as a servant of the Hive, but bearing the truth of what has transpired at the moor." Static. Then a cold voice answered, the steel-edged tone of someone who had held an empire's remains against impossible odds. "You died," the voice said. "Not accusation, fact. Your fleets were consumed, your worlds erased, and now you emerge from the Hive's heart. Explain yourself." Elorian did not flinch. "We are no longer fleeing the Hive, nor are we bringing its hunger. We bring knowledge of what it has become, and of what it now must become next." The voice responded, edged with tension. "Your vessel carries Seraphine Veil." Seraphine stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the channel like a call remembered from a time before collapse. "Yes," she said. "I am here. I did not flee. I endured, and I carry with me the memory of Elendor." A silence followed, a silence of command halls, of analysis, of hearts remembering and fearing. "You speak his name as though he still lives." Seraphine closed her eyes briefly. "He does." Another silence, not disbelief, grief. Then, what has become of him? "He remains in the Hive," Seraphine said softly. "Not as its master, not as its prisoner, as its guide and its witness. He will help it unweave what it has taken, but it cannot do so without time and without protection." A harsh laugh came through the comm. "Protection? You asked the survivors of the galaxy to protect the thing that devoured their families and their worlds." Elorian stepped forward again. "We do not ask for forgiveness or allegiance. We ask for restraint. If the Hive is attacked now, while it is unweaving itself, it will defend itself. And if it defends itself, it will consume again. Not out of hunger, but out of memory." A silence of decision, the hardest kind. Finally, the voice returned. Softer now, heavy. "Seraphine, Elorian, return to our flagship. There are many who remember you, and many who will not believe. You will need to stand before them." Seraphine nodded once. The channel closed. The vessel eased forward, guided by escort ships that maintained cautious formation. None fired, none trusted, none hated, not yet. As the fleet drew closer, Seraphine rested her hand against the viewport. "What we do next," she said quietly, "will shape how the galaxy remembers him, and how it chooses to live after him." Elorian looked at her, steady and true. "Then we must speak with truth, even if it breaks us." Seraphine closed her eyes. "No, truth does not break. It reveals where we were already fractured." The fleet waited ahead. The Hive waited behind. The galaxy waited everywhere. Not for salvation, but for meaning. The docking corridor extended like a spine of metal and tempered glass, lit by pale blue guide lights that flickered as Seraphine and Elorian stepped across its length. The flagship of the Arcanthine expanse was vast, forged in the era before the Hive, when the Constellum still believed battles would be won by armament rather than understanding. Its hull bore scars, long, dark grooves where biomass had once latched and fed. Entire sections were patched with alloy taken from fallen ships. It was not a vessel of glory now. It was a survivor. The airlock sealed behind them. Soldiers waited, armored not in ceremonial plating, but in practical, worn gear that had seen too many last stands. Their weapons were not drawn, but their posture held a tension that was harder than steel. Their eyes did not show hatred, but something sharper, fear that had learned discipline. Seraphine stepped forward, and the soldiers parted, not in respect, but in uncertainty. Everyone in the galaxy knew her name. They did not know what she had become. The corridor led to the central command hall. It was dimly lit, not for atmosphere, but because power had become a resource, rationed with reverence. The seats of council stood half empty. Those who remained carried the gravity of ones who had lost too much to be impressed by words. At the center stood Admiral Kayla Dras, commander of the last fleet. His hair was silvered not with age. No one aged naturally anymore, but by the slow corrosion of unrelenting responsibility. He looked at Seraphine first, then Elorian, and in his gaze there was pain, disbelief, and hope he did not dare speak aloud. "You carry news," Kayla said. "Not welcome, not challenge, statement." Seraphine bowed her head, not as subordinate, but as equal. "The Hive is changing." A ripple of silence spread through the chamber, like the hush that follows the first tremor of an earthquake. One voice broke it, sharp, cutting. Changing into what? It came from a woman near the rear, her armor bearing fresh scoring from recent combat. Another catastrophe, another correction, another mercy. Her throat tightened on the last word, as though it were poison. Elorian stepped forward. "Not mercy as we once understood it, not conquest as we feared. The Hive has begun releasing what it holds. Shock, disbelief, cold comprehension." Kayla's jaw clenched. "You're telling us that the devourer has chosen to stop devouring?" "No," Seraphine said softly. "It is being guided to stop. Elendor remains at its core." Kayla's composure cracked, not externally, but in the subtle widening of his eyes. His voice lowered. "He is alive?" "Yes," Seraphine replied. "Alive and changed, not consumed. Integrated into the Hive's consciousness as its memory. He holds its shape, and through him it remembers why it must let go." The council murmured, quiet, fearful. Their voices were fragments of wounds. "It took my world. It took my wife. My brother chose the Hive willingly. My daughter did not get to choose at all." Seraphine's voice did not rise. It did not command. It simply existed, calm and unyielding. "I know." That single phrase silenced the chamber more effectively than any shout. She stepped into the space before them, the light behind her outlining her form like a figure carved into memory. "The Hive is unmaking itself slowly, carefully. If we attack now, it will defend itself, as it always has, by consuming and evolving in response. If we show restraint and allow Elendor to continue guiding the release, the Hive will dissolve into separate lives again, not as they were, but as they choose to be." Kayla watched her with a strategist's eyes. "You are asking the remnants of the galaxy to trust the creature that destroyed it." Seraphine nodded once. "Yes." "And if we refuse?" Elorian answered this time. "Then the Hive will survive the assault. It will adapt. It will resume its expansion, not from malice, but from what it will perceive as necessity, and the galaxy will fall." The silence that followed was not indecision. It was the quiet moment in which truth rearranges itself inside the human soul. Kayla exhaled, a sound less like defeat and more like weary acceptance. Even if what you say is true, we cannot simply broadcast a ceasefire. Our fleets are scattered, desperate, fragmented. Many have no command. Many act on vengeance alone. Seraphine closed her eyes. Then we must stand before them. We must go to them. We must speak not to their strategy, but to their grief. Elorian nodded, and they will listen, not to orders, but to recognition. Kayla studied them both. Then his gaze softened, not with relief, but with belief reawakening painfully. You intend to become the voice of a galaxy learning how to live again. Seraphine inclined her head. I intend to remind it that life is still possible. Kayla turned to the officers beside him. Prepare the transmission relays. Recall the vanguard. Summon the scattered battalions and the silent fleets. Open every channel. If we do nothing, we lose everything. If we take this chance, we may yet save something. There was no applause, no cries of solidarity. Just movement, quiet, sure, resolute. Wounds did not heal through speeches. They healed through shared endurance. Seraphine turned away from the command hall, her steps slow, deliberate. Elorian walked beside her, silent. When the doors closed behind them, the corridor felt smaller, narrower. Not because the space had changed, but because what came next carried weight heavier than war. Elorian paused. You knew he would choose to stay. Seraphine did not meet his gaze. Yes. Did you know what it would require of you? This time she looked at him. Her eyes were not dry. I did. Elorian placed his hand over his chest, where a soldier's oath once resided. Then I will stand with you until the end. Seraphine's breath trembled, not with weakness, but with gratitude sharpened by loss. Then we go to face what remains of the Constellum, she said, not to restore it, but to help it learn how to let go. They continued down the corridor. Behind them, the galaxy began to gather, not to fight, but to witness, not to conquer, but to choose. The last war would not be one of destruction. It would be one of acceptance, of grief, of release, of what it means to live when the ages have already ended once. The devourer had not needed to be slain. It had needed to be understood. Now the galaxy needed the same. The fleet gathered slowly, like the pieces of a constellation that had once been bright and whole. Signals flickered through the star lanes, answers, acknowledgements, wary affirmations. Across the broken galaxy, ships altered course. Some limped, some glided silently like ghosts. Some were little more than life support shells carrying the last survivors of worlds that no longer existed. But they came, not because they believed, but because they needed a reason to hope again. Seraphine stood at the center of the flagship's transmission dais. The lights dimmed around her. Elorian remained at her side, not as guard nor as counsel, but as witness. Before them, a flickering projection shimmered, a mosaic of faces from every surviving fleet, every hidden refuge, every fractured enclave that still clung to memory. Some faces were lined with grief, some glared with suspicion, some stared empty, hollowed by loss, but all of them were listening. Seraphine drew in a slow breath, not to steady herself, but to remember the way breath had once mattered. My name, she said softly, is Seraphine Vale. The silence deepened, drawn taut. You know what has been lost. I do not need to remind you. I do not need to recount the worlds that are no longer planets, the stars that no longer burn, the voices that will never speak again. A flicker rippled across the projections, faces grim, sorrow recognized. Grief does not need translation, Seraphine continued. We all speak it now. Elorian bowed his head. But the hive, she said, the word gentle, not sharp, is not what it was. Murmurs, disbelief, anger that had no place to go. Seraphine did not raise her voice. She simply continued. It has begun releasing what it holds, not out of defeat, not out of exhaustion, but because Elendor Vel remains at its core, guiding it, remembering for it, teaching it the meaning of choice. A woman's voice cut across the transmission, raw, unsteady. Why should we trust the one who created the hive? Seraphine nodded once. No denial, no deflection. You should not trust him, she said simply. You should remember him. The murmurs stilled, not by force, but by truth. You remember Elendor the sovereign, Elendor the eternal, Elendor the architect of an empire that believed it could shape time. Her voice softened, warm, fragile. But I knew Elendor before any of that. I knew him when he feared losing what he loved, when he believed that to protect something meant to preserve it unchanged. He chose immortality, not because he desired forever, but because he was afraid of endings. She closed her eyes. And fear is a seed that grows into hunger if left unchecked. Elorian stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of every battlefield he had ever survived. We all feared. We all clung to what we could not bear to lose. The hive is not a monster separate from us. It is a reflection of who we once were. Gasps, not of shock, of recognition. Seraphine met the gaze of every face. Elendor did not become a god. He did not become a savior. He became witness. He bears the weight of every memory the hive ever consumed. He holds them so they will not be lost. And he guides the hive now, so it can release what it once held by instinct. A voice spoke, hoarse, breaking. And what becomes of him when the hive is gone? Seraphine's breath trembled. He will fade. The mosaic wavered. He will not die, she said. Immortals do not die. They diminish. He will remain as memory, a quiet voice that once was whole, a presence without form, a star that has gone out, but whose light still travels. Elorian's voice matched the tone of mourning held steady by honor. He chose this, not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but because it was the only way to make meaning of everything that has been lost. The fleet did not argue now. Grief is not a thing that needs convincing. Seraphine continued, You do not need to forgive the hive. You do not need to love it. You do not need to embrace its release. But you must not strike it. If you do, the hive will defend itself. It will feed. It will return to hunger. And the galaxy will end. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, alive. Then Admiral Kayla Dras stepped into view beside Seraphine. His voice was gravel and command and fatigue and devotion. We choose restraint, not because we are weak, but because we remember who we were. A ripple spread across the fleet. Agreement, not universal, not total, but enough. The message was sent. Across the galaxy, weapons powered down. The hive pulsed once, softly, as though acknowledging, as though grateful. Seraphine and Elorian returned to the viewport. The moor glowed faintly in the distance, cradling Elendor's presence like the final ember of a dying flame. Elorian spoke quietly. Do you think he can hear us? Seraphine's hand rested against the glass. Her voice was a whisper, full of love too large for words. He always could. For a long time, they simply watched the distant light. It flickered, not with hunger, not with power, but with memory. A star that went out and still shone.